So good evening to the hardy souls that are still here after a very, very full day, I think, of meetings. Our session is supposed to answer a question about, is the gig economy revolutionizing or not the world of work? And I'd like to suggest that it's probably the other way around, that the world of work is changing, and the gig economy probably is one of the ways in which that change will be manifested. This isn't a marginal question, by the way. It's estimated, and I think it was said in the last, one of the last sessions, that about 25% of the working age group in North America and in Europe is already engaged in some form of independent work. We call it independent, and leave it for the session to look more at what is the gig economy. And finally, in light of what some people said during the earlier sessions, I overheard, this independent kind of work, many people in Latin America and especially Africa say, so what's new for us? We're looking for the permanent kind, not the occasional amount. So sometimes they leave us questioning as to what we're talking about. And we all know that digital platforms are making it easier and easier for people to access what we might call independent work, especially over their mobile devices. Now, to look at all of this, we have a distinguished panel, and I'll call them up in alphabetical order. Juliet Schor is professor of sociology at Boston College, and since 2011, Juliet is running a major research project directly about the sharing economy. Juliet, please come and join us. Marco Torregrossa is Secretary General of the European Forum of Independent Professionals. He was a policy officer in the EU Commission, and he's a lawyer by training. He's specializing in collaborative self-employment, cooperative solo entrepreneurship, digital work on platforms, and the impacts of flexible labor regulations on the future of work. Marco, please come and join us. And we have Agata Wejman with us, Director and Head of EU Public Policy and Government Relations at Uber, which was a great deal talked about earlier today. She used to be Google's Head of Public Policy in Central and Eastern Europe, and she has worked on financial and private sector development at the World Bank. Agata, please come and join us. So in this round, as usual, we turn our backs on some of you, but the chairs swivel, so sometimes we can turn around and say hello. Not too much. If you swivel too much, everyone gets seasick. So you heard a little bit what I said. This is not anymore a sideline of our economy. It's becoming, in North America and in Europe, a fairly important piece. And even if in much of the developing world rather, much of the emerging economies, the one thing people want to do is to get rid of independent piecemeal work and would love to get into the steady job environment, we seem to be moving in some other parts of the world another way. So we heard a lot today about the sharing economy. And I want to ask you, first of all, and we'll do this in the form of a conversation more than anything, what's so special? What's the characteristic of this so-called gig economy? How is it different, or is it a part of the sharing economy? How does it differ from traditional freelancing? Who'd like to take a try at that first? I'm looking at you. You go on that one, and then we go to Marco, and then Agata. Go ahead, Juliet.
Thank you, Maria. Well, I think in some ways the sort of labor services or gig part of the sharing economy is the least unique, because if we look at things like lodging with Airbnb or other parts of the sharing economy, those are mostly peer-to-peer. But what we have with the gig economy is in some ways more akin to I like to think of some parts of it as a servant economy, some of the lower tiers of it, personal services economy. It's not sharing, it's engaging labor for short periods of time and under short, typically very short conditions as opposed to longer term. I mean, what the whole sector has in common, of course, is there's a common technology that's used across the platforms. Yes. But I think in the end, we're going to find that that is really not so unique as more and more companies adopt these kinds of technologies.
And Marco, how does it differ from freelancing, traditional freelancing that you know well about?
Well, I mean, first we need to define what freelancers are. I mean, freelancers are highly skilled and very well-educated self-employed workers without employees or employers. So these are the knowledge workers, let's say, they work in business to business, and they are the higher end of the spectrum of self-employment. Now, the recent media coverage of the gig economy has created the perception that all independent workers are either driving for Uber or running errands for TaskRabbit. But this is actually a very small subset of independent work, which spans different income brackets and different skills level. Now, what is common, for example, for university professors, I was saying earlier, that they can supplement their income by writing textbook or giving paid speech, which is an activity that is qualified as independent work. It really tells you that the biggest increase in self-employment since 2008 has been in highly skilled professions, which are the lawyers, the accountants, the designer, the writers, etc., etc. And I mean, yes, I agree that technology has been given this biggest shift, but what the technology has given us is a renewed trust into strangers. So the gig economy has been there. I mean, freelancing has been around for the last 3 decades, and very, very knowledge-intensive occupation in oil and gas, in scientific research. And this morning, listen to that, I heard that in Victorian London, the bricklayers were actually, the bricklayers that were building and maintaining Tower Bridge in London were actually paid by the brick they were laying. So, I mean, this tells you that the gig economy has been there forever.
You're not implying to us that we're going back to guilds, so we'll move away from that. There is something going on here, though. There is something going on, and I turn back to everyone, that we use the word gig economy because somehow it's become popularized, either because something has changed or because we see something happening. How do you see it? And then I'd like to look a little bit at the research that's been going on. Go ahead.
Clearly, something is happening, although I would say the phenomenon, I would agree with you that the phenomenon is not new by itself, but the very fact that there are so many different notions that are being put in front of us. You mentioned gig economy, there has been sharing economy mentioned. I will throw into the bucket collaborative economy and also circular economy that brings the sustainability and sharing from a slightly different perspective into it, which means that there is a change of behaviors, change of the ways that we are thinking about economic activity and work that I think is getting, in a way, accelerated or empowered, democratized by the technology that is available. And I can maybe refer to our experience at Uber. The models that we are involved in are about making sure that the assets that are fairly expensive, the second most expensive asset in an average household is a car. And it's clear that these cars right now are not being put into the proper use. They are staying idle for 96% of the time. There is an opportunity to use these assets in a much more effective way. And that's what our model is enabling. But to come back to your question on the gig economy, I think what is very relevant here is the fact that while gig type of work has existed always, technology enables us to decide in a much more flexible way when we are going to use the opportunity to work, when we need it. It helps us decide how much of this work do we need to perform in a given time. And it allows us to tailor our work schedule around our lives. And I think there's a huge empowering element there.
So I'm going to be a little provocative now and turn to you, Juliet, with the following. There's probably a disruptive change in the future of work altogether that's taking place. This is due to increases, as you all know, in computational and artificial intelligence and robotics. So probably nice, steady jobs at the upper end, middle and upper end of skills are going to, for not entirely, but for a great deal, be displaced. Maybe by other things, maybe not so much anymore. We're suggesting by some studies, not so much anymore. So tell me, what does your research tell you about who's getting in, why they're in, what's happening, and what you see as the trends?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to tie the gig economy to the larger labor market. And that's a really important thing. I think often people have thought of it in the other way. The gig economy is disrupting the labor market. But I think the better way to think about it is in the reverse. One of the reasons we found so many providers going onto platforms like TaskRabbit and so forth in Boston, where a lot of our research is done, is because they were unable to find jobs after the financial crisis, or they may have a lot of student debt or so forth. So lack of economic opportunities of a much more stable and sort of non-gig form are important in pushing people in. But there's one other part of this that's really important, I think, that hasn't been recognized yet. And that is, and it relates to this point about someone who would be engaging in these kinds of activities in addition to whatever their full-time thing is. And that's a large number of people who have other jobs or they're students or so forth. In the United States, what's happening is that very highly educated people, so college grads, we even have, we have lawyers, we have PhDs and so forth who are on these platforms earning money. But these are a large part, a lot of what they're doing are not the highly skilled knowledge work, but it's fairly lower or more general skills like driving or doing tasks or, if you're renting out your home, part of it's cleaning. A lot of house cleaners among the women, but these are house cleaners with graduate degrees. So part of what is happening is that they are displacing the labor of people who don't have college degrees because they're increasing their earnings. And so it's contributing to not 1% inequality, which is what we've heard so much about, but it's increasing inequality among the 80%. And I think it's a really important thing because what the platforms did with the advanced technology and the cool terminology and so forth is they destigmatized blue-collar and pink-collar labor.
Oh, this is very interesting. Go ahead, Marco.
I mean, the highest increase in self-employment has actually been in the part-time self-employment. So those people that they want to supplement their income, and by doing that they build income security in a sense that they are working on platforms as a backup if they lose their main job. So these people are the moonlighters, as we discussed earlier. It's a term very much used in US. And why am I saying this? Because this is really important. I mean, these people already have a job from which they get their social security, the benefits, and so on. So we need to be putting the things very much in perspective. I think the discussions at the moment about the collaborative economy is not healthy. There are questions like, is Uber evil, or is the sharing economy exploitative? It's always like a distinction between self-employed and employee. I suggest to go past these questions and ask more relevant questions, or not always trying to find the right answers, but try to formulate the right questions, which is, what is a flexible labor market? How do you enable people to find multiple and better alternative than a traditional employment? And we should not lament that Uber drivers don't get full-time benefits. We should ask ourselves why full-time benefits only come attached to a full-time employment. And this is much more a bigger challenge than considering Uber drivers, employee or workers. It involves redefining the safety net. It involves having portable benefits where independent workers can bring along from platform to platform when they pierce together a freelance job. It involves a collective bargaining from the workers with the platforms like Uber or Etsy. It involves what we spoke on the phone with you, Maria, once about do we need a universal basic income to counteract the insecurity of the gig economy that means the work.
So this is really important. That's why I maintain, and this is the part that goes against what is written in the program, I maintain that it is not the gig economy that's changing the world of work. It's the world of work that's changing, period. And the answers to it may differ. For those of you who were not on the telephone with Marco and me and just before, I'm a big supporter of what is called the universal basic income. A universal basic income. There are others who like this idea too. It has to, we have to go this way eventually in the super highly developed, digitized economies, where, as I say, certain parts of the computational and artificial intelligence and robotics may demand a new way of looking at these kinds of benefits. So, Juliet, what do you see coming along in this respect?
Well, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. However, the reality in some places, I'll take my own country, for example, which is a large country, the United States. Not only are we not having the conversation that you, I think, rightly said we need to have, but we are about, our government is about to eliminate Medicare. Okay, so the idea that people without stable jobs are going to have health insurance and portable benefits and a universal benefit income, universal basic income, and all of that it's insane at this moment. We're not there, and so I think we do have to ask questions like: are these platforms, which are now increasingly employing significant numbers of people, are they at least providing some floor? Because part of what we're seeing is eroding wages, increasing vulnerability of providers, more and more control, and less flexibility. So that the way the platforms started out is not where they are today, and I think it's unlikely to be where they are in a few years from now, because there is a trajectory that they are following, and it's not one that in our research, because we've been following people over time, is one that the providers are very happy about.
So I turn to all of you again, because this is really, it's almost what I would call a policy, if not a philosophy question. Do you fix something by disregarding the way the trend is going and trying to fix it on the basis of past experience? That is, in many European countries, worker benefits. Let's leave the United States out of this at the moment, because it's really extraordinary that that country still doesn't have, even with a full care system, health care system, and the benefits are rather patchy and dodgy at times. Or is it that the gig economy is going to make us aware that the old way in which benefits and what I call the uncertainty principle in people's lives was looked at, and we're going to have to change that everywhere. So which way do you think we're going to go? And is the gig economy just a passing part of this? Or is this something that's solidly here for us to worry about? And not just Uber, but as you were saying, Marco, before, many platforms exist, some of which don't even have the prominence of the big ones, so they don't even attract any kind of concern over these things. So how do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, we've been discussing that gig economy has always existed, right? Gig jobs have always existed. And right now, to put things into proportion, according to a recent study published by McKinsey, the work that is done with the intermediation of platforms amounts only to 15% of all of the self-employment, all of the independent work. So these are the proportions. But I think what Marco has pointed out, the fact that we need to move from the world of clear distinctions between employment and self-employment is a very important point, because indeed we live in the world where protection of labor is very much enrooted in concepts which are related to thinking about big firms, big corporations, huge masses of employees, and stable labor relations. Technology is not only accelerating the process, the way the work is looking, but technology is also modifying the way the firm is working. The economies of the firm are working, right? So there is much more reduction of transaction costs. There is much more empowerment of the individual, which then means if we want to have a safety net, this safety net is better to be attached to the individual rather than to a workplace.
Well, that's also a way for some, you might say, some corporations to kind of get out of it. But on the other hand, not clear which way we're going to go.
Well, what it's not clear,
Marco.
at least in the European Parliament, which is what I follow the debates, and I think there's a wide cross-party agreement that we need the portable benefits. But there's no agreement of how are we going to do it and who's going to fund it. Whether it is the public sector, but they will increase taxes and we don't like that, or it's the platforms, but the platform don't like to do that, or it's the workers that with a little piece they could put in a pot, etc., to just fund these portable benefits. If you ask me, I think it should be like a combination of the three. I mean, this whole thing, I think it relates to policies, okay? I mean, historically, the policymakers have created policies for business and policies for individuals. But now the gig economy blurs this distinction, right? So we need policy for people as business, which is like a third category. And we need the updated governmental survey to track and to measure really the growth of the economy, not just by the number of jobs, but by the hours of work. And the very last point about the vulnerability, I think policymakers need to take a three-pronged approach, which is to promote, to legitimize and professionalize the advantaged segments, and protect the vulnerable segments, and third, to clearly define what is false and genuine self-employment so that the former can be prevented. Basically, they should promote a whole sort of contractual employment contract agreements as a way to promote wider labor market participation and inclusion.
So, Juliet, are we just dreaming here, or how do you see it?
I don't think we're dreaming, but I do think that we have to have this conversation about, say, portability of benefits and so forth in the context of who's appropriating value, because
Right.
the problem is for the lower, one of the things about the gig economy, like the regular labor market, it's a very tiered economy. There are people at the sort of the most skilled and people who are in the best labor market situations who can get very good payment for their services, and you go all the way down to the bottom where I think the question of are people being exploited is not the wrong question. I think it's a very essential question, because we are studying people who are badly exploited and who are getting less than minimum wage and who are basically increasingly forced to or compelled to put themselves in situations which are very problematic, either from a danger point of view or an economic point of view. And we're studying delivery people and ride, drivers. So where's the value going? I mean, what's happening in this economy is more and more of the value is going to the very top. So it's the platform founders, owners, the venture capitalists, and so forth, who are making a lot of money. And if we want to have a fair and good benefit system, people below are going to have more money so they can afford to actually pay money into a retirement fund or an education fund or insurance. Because right now, when you earn less than minimum wage or minimum wage, you can't survive.
So I'm going to come for questions very shortly, so start thinking about them, and I'm just going to give one last round of one last round to feed into your questions too. We'll come back to you for sure. You brought up who benefits from the gig economy. There are very few very large cooperative platforms. More of them, what you have said before to me, Marco, are very fragmented, and what you're saying also, Juliet, very small and fragmented, so even less visible, even less secure. So who and what is, how is the shape of the market going in the gig economy? And more generally, just along the question you've raised, Juliet, personally, will it bring more flexibility or even less? And my real, let's say, disturbing question I have here is I have no answer to it. Will it reassure people that they can sell their assets, meaning their personal assets, their knowledge, their abilities, as well as anything else? Or is it going to bring further uncertainty? So last round on that one, and then everyone I'm turning to questions. We'll come to you. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the strategy of all of these big platforms is towards achieving a monopoly. So they go to some place and they try to expand vertically until they get a network effect and a bunch of happy users supporting them. Then they expand horizontally, which is what happens with Airbnb. Airbnb is becoming a travel company. It started with accommodation, but now they are even cleaning your clothes when you are when you're traveling, etc. So they're expanding. So what happens is that brings a lot of value to the regions, to the local community, because you allow people to monetize their assets. But yes, indeed, you have a 10%, sometimes 20% that leaves the region and goes back to the investors in the Silicon Valley, and also the data of the users go back. So I do advise local policymakers, and they ask me, what should I do? Because I understand that the front end of the story, it's a lot of benefit for the micro entrepreneurs. But what happens with this 15% that leaves the region, so the back end? Now, there are a number of ways. I mean, the local, am I going too long? Or?
No,
okay. Well, the local policymaker have a great power, which is the procurement power. Through public procurement, you can create actually a platform of platforms, and there are pilots like this in the UK, where providers can actually share their pricing system and available times on a sort of platform, so that they can move around, okay, and bring along with them a sort of reputation, this pricing system, etc., and it will allow them to work not only as a driver for Uber, but as a host in Airbnb tomorrow, or as a TaskRabbit the other day. And you would also include a lot of local platforms in this platform of platforms. And why is local procurers running this? Because they can more easily enforce tax collection, health and safety requirements, and regulate this whole thing, which are desperately trying to do. So have a look at these pilots.
Interesting. Agata.
So who benefits?
Yeah.
Looking from the perspective of Uber, it's cities and citizens. Mm-hmm. Cities, because of the urban mobility in which we are active. We live in the times where the private use of cars is contributing to congestion, to the need for excessive parking spaces in our towns, and for increased carbon emissions. If we move to shared mobility, these things start to disappear. There is a lot of research going on right now that shows how the shared use of cars is contributing to improving the quality of life in our cities, making them greener, and making, for the most part, us much more democratized society. Just because urban mobility means affordable and available access to transportation for people who didn't have this access before. So there is a direct link between the ability to get on-demand means of transportation and your ability for actually getting out of poverty. This is backed by Harvard research, this is backed by OECD research.
But it brings up a question that I'm not sure if you've done any research on you. Is most of that confined, most of the benefits like that confined to urban areas? Or, well, most of us live in urban areas, so that's rather a silly question. Or
right
not?
now, 1/3 of the global population lives in urban areas. And this is going...
Much more.
This is what UN data...
Yeah,
It's
gonna be...
It passed
it's
what they
gonna
call
be-
the 50% some years ago.
According to my information, 1/3,
Right.
and by 2050, UN reports that we will 66%
Don't trust
of the
those
world's population. But
statistics
okay,
too
we will
much.
It's more.
distrust.
I think it's about
I think it's
60 now.
But
yeah.
anyway,
But anyway, so we live.
There's
We
a-
all agree we live in increasingly urbanized world.
Yeah.
This urbanized world needs to have good transportation. Urban areas are growing. People with lower income
Understood
are
that.
staying outside of these areas, and obviously public transportation can only go so far, and the means of on-demand transportation that Uber is enabling are actually reaching those underprivileged,
So it's more
underserved
in
areas.
the urban
Yeah.
area. So the research that you're doing on not only who is benefiting, but where that benefit is going to be spread, how does it look from the research you're doing?
Well, I would say, number one, primary beneficiaries are the platforms, the
Themselves.
founders and the owners. Number two are consumers. Because one of the things that the platforms have done, it's part of why they're so popular, is they've provided lower cost, good quality services, particularly in their two big platforms, Airbnb and Uber. So lower cost rides and lodging. If you're on the outside, say for something like Airbnb, if you're on the outside of that, you're getting hurt. If you live in a neighborhood that's being taken over by Airbnb, for example, you're not getting those benefits and you're getting the negative externalities. So the users, the providers, and the both sides of the market are getting benefit. I would say with the providers, how much benefit is really varying, and it's again, it depends on where in the space. But I want to say something about the environmental dimensions, because it's very frequently claimed that the sharing economy is good for the environment, and you hear it across many platforms and types. So I think the platforms can't have it both ways. On the one hand, what they're saying is we're providing more jobs and opportunity and more demand, which means more impact. So something like the ride sourcing apps,
It works both ways.
people are moving off public transportation in the United States, for example. What the research shows, they're moving off public transportation into these cheap rides. Same thing for the travel, and we heard it this morning. What Airbnb allows you to do is travel more because it's cheaper, which means your footprint has come up. The issue of unused assets, okay, which was at the core of this conversation when we started, now we're going to use that asset, it is increasingly irrelevant to what's going on. The driver who brought me to the airport was in a car leased only to give paid rides in, and he has to give $75 a week, or he is forced to pay a large sum for that car. If he does $75 a week, he doesn't. It's also taking away their flexibility. So if you look at the way the sector is moving, some of those early efficiencies are disappearing.
This is practically always true in these things.
Can I give you one more example?
One more example, and then I'm going to bring in some questions.
Movie streaming. There has been some latest studies. I mean, everybody says, okay, if you stream a movie on your laptop, it's much more environmentally friendly than taking your car to the store and to buy the DVD, right? So you think you're doing a nice thing. But the rebound effect is that the energy which is consumed by your laptop when you watch the movie, I mean, just put a hand on your laptop when you watch a movie, see what happens. The fan starts ventilating, you see, and there's much higher energy consumption. This is called the rebound effect. The mindset of the people, it's very difficult to change when it comes to environment.
That's a very
I'm
funny
based,
example.
as a freelancer, I'm based in a co-working space. You think this is the most environmentally friendly thing to do instead of buying offices. well, you see there are people that are abusing the printer, are abusing the lighting inside. You see, so it's not always, I agree with what you said. So it's always about the mindset of the consumer that needs to change, and this is going to be a process that will take decades.
I think but all of you agree that the popularity, and I'm glad you brought up the word consumer, the popularity of this is because we don't always see all the impacts, but for the consumer, it's really made life much easier. And that's something we either have to deal with it, get over it, or find ways to look at the repercussions. I'm still going to bring in some questions now. I'm taking down, I'll take 3 or 4 or more now so that we have a round to answer. Yes, as always, please introduce yourself, Nina, please, and where you're from. Do we have a microphone on here? Try again. If not, is there another microphone around? No, it's not working.
This one, take this one.
Yeah, thank you, Marco.
We could share. We're sharing. We're sharing.
Of course, we rent it out in the meantime. Yes, go ahead.
Nina Gardner, Director of Strategy International, and looking on basically advising on sustainability with companies and teaching on this issue. But I have a question about the Uber and Airbnb. But the Uber here is worrisome because I hear it's basically a technology platform, and we hear that Uber is moving toward driverless cars, right? So what happens in terms of you're creating this amazing network all over the world, and then at some point,
You get driverless
we will
Uber.
have a huge unemployment problem, right? So it might be good for all of us in the cities, but it is hurting very much public transportation and employment. Then the Airbnb problem. For San Francisco and a place like Venice, where my mother is from, it is absolutely killing the rent situation for people who are actually working there. They cannot afford to live there anymore because everyone is renting out their palazzos to Airbnb. So what does one do with these situations? It's helped our life a lot, but it's also really having some huge impacts. And this is helping the platforms and not so much the people.
Thank you, Marco.
I have an answer to that, but probably
I'm taking some
always
questions, a
Uber.
lot of questions first, and then we'll come back. Right here, there were some questions, right. And do we have a microphone that works over here? Can you pass it down? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm a student at Sciences Po. You spoke of the need for an individual citizen-based and not employer-based social benefits, namely a universal basic income. Do you think this is feasible in developing countries and or nations with stronger corporate than governmental power? And in that way, what do you think is the corporate responsibility of companies in this nation to provide social benefits?
This question is for you, Maria.
Yeah, we'll see.
To eliminate the exploitation that Juliet spoke of.
All right, other questions before let's come over here. Is there a microphone? The microphone's over there. Look, we'll take, let's do here and then I'll come right back to you.
Hi there, I'm Anara Simpson from Mozilla, from Silicon Valley, and I just want to give you the other side of this. So, platforms making money and founders making money, I think it's really careful, we want to be careful not to generalize that, because up till the beginning of 2016, Uber did not turn a profit. And so I just want to make sure we address that. And also, nobody is twisting anybody's arms to drive an Uber. Nobody's twisting anybody's arms to do Airbnb or any of these other things. So, we want to talk about a marketplace economy as well before we sort of, put all the blame on platforms and technology.
Thank you. And now we'll take the microphone over here. We listen to you carefully in the sharing economy. Please.
Thank you. I'm Benita. I'm the founder of The People Who Share. So it's more of a comment, really. I find it really extraordinary and kind of unacceptable that we're here discussing working in the sharing economy and no worker's perspective is represented on that stage. I think it's appalling. So in the absence of that, I'm just going to tell you, we've conducted some qualitative research. It's a very, very tiny sample, but we've interviewed 200 workers in the sharing economy from different countries around the world. And what I can tell you is that out of those 200, 198 of them are happy with their work. And the reasons that they're happy with their work is because it's providing flexibility, it's providing choice for people who've been previously excluded from the labour market, who for perhaps traditional forms of labour do not work. The point is this is not for everybody. Okay? This is not suitable for everybody. Not everybody is suited to being their own boss, right? Not everybody, that's not for everyone. And no one is saying this is a forced choice that you have to make. However, for those people who are choosing to do this, perhaps because they've previously been excluded from the labour market, this is certainly far from exploitation. And when you speak to those workers, as I do every single day, because this is the work that I do, you will find they are in fact overwhelmingly happy. But I believe we should have people who are, cleaning, people who are doing all kinds of jobs, they should be represented on that platform.
Thank you. Over here. Any questions here? No, shy.
Perhaps we can start
All right,
answering.
well, that's enough for a first round. So I think you heard some of those questions. Driverless cars was one of them. What's going to happen then? I don't think this is just peculiar to Uber. That's why I've said that the economy that is driven more and more by computational intelligence and artificial intelligence is the problem, robotics, and that this is not, it is not the gig economy that's making that happen. When that happens, a lot of things are going to change, including everything we've been talking about here on regulatory ways of doing things, and most importantly, what you're talking about, the question I put before, which is the uncertainty that this will immediately put into the workers and work, and even highly talented people. What does that do? So citizen-based benefits, you heard about the universal basic income, we can come back to that. Platforms that don't always make money, what about cooperatives? What kinds of platforms, is that popular, is that possible? Does it work as a business model? And the workers' perspectives of those who do actually take part in this. So let's have a round on those things. Agata, you want to start?
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate your intervention, and would like to encourage you to participate tomorrow in a panel where we will be hosting a colleague of mine who's running a program which is called 1 Million Women, and Uber is committed to to increasing participation of women in the transportation sector. And on that panel, you will definitely hear from drivers as well. So please join tomorrow. When it comes to self-driving cars, yes, we live in times where our lives are going to get changed within the next few decades with improved means of transportation, and it also means self-driving. However, we at Uber, looking at it from the perspective of ride-sharing platform, we already now see that the way to self-driving cars first is a longer one. It's a few decades. And that ride-sharing with real drivers is not going to disappear from day to day. Yeah? Moreover, what we are seeing in our ecosystem of drivers is that by joining a platform, by starting to actually work with digital technology, by building certain skills on the digital level, as well as on actual entrepreneurship skills level, also entrepreneurship attitudes, these people get encouraged to build their businesses. And they are not only active in businesses around driving, which they are active in, but they are building the whole ecosystem around the cars, around the driving. Think about maintenance, think about different solutions that the community of drivers, of the private hire vehicles drivers need. So for self-driving cars, yes, there will be maintenance, there will be a whole ecosystem around it where I'm pretty sure there will be jobs generated, which we don't even know about right now. I also wanted to stress that one phenomenon that on-demand work that we are seeing at Uber is bringing is about inclusion, and about very equal, non-discriminating treatment of people, no matter who they are, how they look, what sex they represent, what ethnic group, what minority, and so forth. I think this is very, very important. We see that a lot of drivers, and France is a fantastic example, by the way. 40% of people who drive with Uber in France have been previously unemployed. And half of them have been unemployed for more than a year. So there is a lot of generation of new economic opportunities happening for people who didn't have these opportunities before. They are driving, they see the future in building their businesses around driving, and I think this is something that, as it was said, it may not be for everyone, but there is clearly not only demand, but a huge social inclusion impact of this type of work.
Let's, excuse me, just let me turn over the page. Let's look also, please, at some of the questions that were raised, or if I put it this way, the results of some of the questions that were raised. If we look at citizen-based benefits as opposed to corporate-based benefits or state-based benefits, are they opposites? Are they going to be complementary? How do you see the three of them meshing in? Marco, this may be something you might be interested in, but think about it for a moment. Before we go there, Juliet, again from your research, the platforms that you have worked with, have you come across the cooperative kinds? Are they a business model that's possible? Do they answer some of the questions about, let's say, the benefit for both the consumer and the people taking part, or not?
I can answer that. Can I just come
yes,
around on a couple of the things?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the fact that some of these platforms have not yet made a profit, I think, is largely because they're going for growth rather than profitability at the moment. But I think it's unlikely that the founders and investors are not going to, unless something very extraordinary happens, are not going to reap considerable financial benefit. So, and I'm a very pro-technology person. I mean, I think this is, for me, it's really more about what is the trajectory of this sector and what is happening to providers. In particular, the ones I'm worried about are those who need to rely on platforms for full-time incomes, because I think what we have found is the people who rely on them to supplement their income obviously have a lot more. They have the flexibility. They can do it when the conditions are favorable for them, and so they are better protected against that word that I used, exploitative conditions. But what we see over time, after following people, and this gets to Benita's point, is that a number of the people that we are following over time have become less happy with their conditions. So many of them started out very happy
that's all they had,
with the platforms, but also the platforms were treating them well. And over time, the policies and so forth of the platforms have changed. So it's not just about what's happening today. It's also about thinking, what is the direction? Where are we going? Are providers getting treated better and better? Are their wages falling as more and more people come on? And back to this point about the twisting arms, and also the point you made, it's really, really important. What's the labor market context? Because the more unemployment there is, it's just basic sort of supply and demand in the labor market. The harder it is for those providers to get better conditions. I mean, that's basic.
Marco, do you have anything to add on this? And then I'm going to ask the audience some questions.
I realize no one really answered your question about cooperatives, which I'd like to do. What I realize within the freelance community is that there's a trend towards mutualism. So it's like group of freelancers, particularly those based in co-working spaces, are beginning to help each other on a sort of reciprocity level. Okay, so just because they can amass more purchasing power together, so they can negotiate better rates with the healthcare, with the insurance, etc. Sometimes they can even bid for larger projects in the public procurement process than they could actually be able to do if they were alone. And yes, it is a trend that it moves towards a cooperative model of work. And I think it was also discussed this afternoon, the technology called the blockchain, which underlines Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer payment system, will actually accelerate this, and it will probably get rid of a platform which is in between charging, etc. Just maybe one little comment about, because I sympathize very much with the lady that said the affordability of housing in San Francisco got much worse. My parents live in Venice, and they in Italy, as you realize from my accent. And basically what they do is they rent on Airbnb. And I mean, Venice is a city which has no locals. It's just a museum, right? So it's the best example of gentrification in the world, even more than San Francisco. So what to do with that? As I talk to the platforms, I tell them that they need to share their data. They are mining a lot of data, these platforms, which have insights of not only business nature, but also social and economic nature. Now, these platforms are not very good in passing over this data to the regulators, because they should, in my opinion, because the regulators need the data at hand in order to regulate effectively. Now, the platforms don't want to do it because of privacy, because, you know, the algorithm is a commercial secret, etc., etc. But I think if they would share data, then the regulators could then relax all the licensing requirements to them, relaxing all the regulation to them, and in turn, they will ask some sort of accountability to the platforms. Now, as a digital platform, you have to accept accountability and say, okay, I am Airbnb, and perhaps the housing situation in San Francisco will get worse. I'm Uber, and perhaps the traffic in New York City is getting worse just because of Uber. So I accept this kind of accountability, but at the same time, I share more and more data with the regulators.
Yeah, I think maybe just to...
Yeah, go ahead, and
I think that,
we're going to finish up.
That was a very good point, as well as Juliet's point about making sure that long-term, that we see the big picture on the employment patterns and so forth. I think platforms like Uber are very much committed to making sure that we are part of the discussion, that we are able to both contribute but also benefit from feedback, because there's a lot of stuff that is changing around us, and we are, because of this, for example, we work with a number of researchers exactly who are able to use the data that we are collecting with regards to urban mobility, to the social impact, and there is a number of amazing pieces of evidence, of research that are able to be developed. I also think that there are ways for the future for platforms to be able to become helpful to cities, to urban areas, yes, with the data we have. Of course, with certain respect for privacy, and I think there are ways to make sure that privacy is protected.
So we're going to close this session in a minute, but before we do, I'm just going to ask some questions. Those of you who have heard the name Yogi Berra know his famous sayings, and one of them was, "It's very hard to make predictions, particularly about the future." But we're going to try. So, how many people here, this is really future, think that the world of skilled labor now as well is going to be reduced and not enhanced as former technology disruptions did? It enhanced the work, it added a lot of new skills and so on, but that the coming computational, artificial intelligence, and robotics will have a direct impact on even skilled labor. How many feel that that is going to happen? All right? And then how many of you, about half, how many of you feel that the gig economy is going to increase? So, more of you feel that the gig economy is going to increase than that the work labor picture is going to decrease. So that must mean that you think that people will be using their assets, whether it's their skills or something they have, or their time, or their abilities, to supplement their work. Is that what you're saying? Yes? Raise your hand. Okay. Not as convincing as those who think that the gig economy is going to increase. There's a contradiction in terms here. And so we have to think that through. There's a contradiction here. Either the labor market is going to change drastically to allow more people to want to do or have to do gig work, because there's only 24 hours in the day. And so you can't do really full-time work and full-time gig and even part-time. It's a small portion that does that. So independent work of any kind, whether it's gig or independent, might well increase, you're saying, but not necessarily permanent work decreasing. So we're left again with a contradiction, which is our lives in any case. So I ask you all to thank our panel. And to go away as confused as you were when you entered here. But at least I hope that you have some new ideas to debate among ourselves later on. Thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you very much.